I'm no economist. I'll do a little bit of cowboy math. But any calf that you don't get on the ground is a chunk of change out of your pocket.
Losing calves during pregnancy may not be a big factor in your operation, but it's still a loss, and it does affect your bottom line. So today, Chloe Collins out of the University of Missouri Extension walks us through what can cause gestational pregnancy losses as we look at potential causes during the early embryonic phase of the first 45 days to the fetal period from 45 days to birth, plus ways to mitigate those losses in both our young and older cows.
So the good news is there's probably just as many mitigation strategies as there are causes of loss.
It may not seem like a real problem in your cow herd, but however you look at it, it's still a loss. And maybe, just maybe, understanding it a little better could increase your calf crop by 1% or 2%. Mitigating pregnancy loss in our cow herd is our subject today on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. I'm Justin Mills, and you're listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Thank you for joining us on our program here today. As you heard there in the opening, we're going to be talking on the topic of mitigating pregnancy loss in cow herds. It's really been something that's been kind of in the back of my mind for a couple of years, and I wanted to explore that a little bit more, in which we will here today. Now, a couple things I need to make right, and that is, if you're regular listeners, I've been talking about the fact that we're going to be doing a show on congestive heart failure in cattle, and we are. So trust me, we are going to get it done at some point here, but we had scheduled to do it last month, scheduled to do it this weekend on our show. That didn't happen, but we are going to be doing that. So I will be sure to get that nailed down a little bit further and let you know when that's, because I've actually had some interest, some folks texting and calling about that as well. So just thought I'd let you know in case you're a regular listener. And really the tone of that conversation was getting into the fact that with congestive heart failure, it's really been something that's been more of a concern, or used to be more of a concern for those cattle in higher elevations, but that's not always the case anymore. We're going to talk about why and what's some of the elements with that. So that will be a show coming up down the line, and I will make sure that we let you know when that's going to happen. But unfortunately, we're not going to get into it here today. Now, the other thing too, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, he'll be stopping by this week for his edition of Tim's 2 Cents, so be sure to listen to that. And of course, meteorologist Don Day will be in for his long-range weather as we look at that, and it looks like some things are stacking up to start to see some spring storms, as we already have, but continuation of that. We'll talk about that with our long-range weather with meteorologist Don Day later on. Well, as we turn towards our program here today, like I was just referencing a bit ago, mitigating pregnancy loss in cow herds. It's really been something that I have thought a little bit about in our own cow herd that we manage, and why we're seeing that loss of calves in that time frame between preg checking and when they actually are supposed to be hitting the ground on that. So joining us today on the program to talk a little bit more about it is Chloe Collins out of the University of Missouri Extension and their dairy field specialist. And Chloe, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thank you, Justin, for inviting me.
Well, I came across an article that you had written, and it was and the title of it was Mitigating Pregnancy Loss in Cow Herds. And I thought it was interesting because this was something that has been in my mind for a while now in our own herd and in our own operation here, because as I was telling you before we went on air, every year we preg check cows in the fall, so we know who's bred, and we mark them by their cycle, first, second, third, or fourth, and we'll usually ultrasound them. But one of the concerns that I've always had is where we're seeing loss. I mean, we're in the herd quite extensively through calving season because we're tagging calves and we're in them every day, and yet we're not finding, if we lose a calf, we find a calf, but there's cows that are coming in open at the end of the summer, and we haven't ever seen a calf. And so that for me, that has been really outlines my concern of wanting to see, what's going on? What am I not seeing? What's going on? And so, and I know we'll get into the details of that, but that's probably outlines or a little bit was the preface of your article as well.
Yes, sir. So that seems to be the $1 million question. And a lot of people do really see that loss as that calf itself, where that cow slipped her calf. You can see it with your own 2 eyes. But any other type of loss that is not that is a lot harder to pinpoint and recognize in your herd.
So when we start to look at that, then there's definitely two different stages. And I want to first talk about maybe the very first thing that we look at. And in that first time frame, of course, when we're preg checking, a lot of times we're pregging cows that are going to be anywhere from bred 35 to 100 days pregnant. So we get into that first, what you would call the early embryonic phase of that, which would be less than 45 days. So visit about that, because I have some questions regarding that, and maybe if we're causing some losses in that time frame that I'm not aware of. But I want you to first outline that from your perspective.
Yeah. So when I talk about early embryonic state of pregnancy, so that would be from day 0 that she is bred up until about 45 days in gestation. So at that point, we don't really have a fully formed, recognizable fetus. For lack of better terms, it kind of just looks like a blob hanging out there. So if that cow were to lose that, you're not going to actually see it. So things that I think of that really occur in that early embryonic state is that fetus is not going to be as established. It's going to be a little bit more like fragile, if you will. So more types of stress and different things can affect that stage of loss. So one that I think of a lot is transportation stress. So there's a general rule of thumb that we shouldn't be moving our cattle about 5 to 40 days following that insemination or that breeding, just because that embryo is not heavily implanted in that uterus and is not very sturdy or stable. And another thing we can think about too is heat stress. That plays a huge role in that early embryonic period. So, of course, if that cow is too hot, she's trying to establish pregnancy. Those embryos, they're not going to do well in hot temperatures. So anything that puts her into heat stress, so usually above 80 degrees, is when we start seeing heat stress effects. That's not going to be a really conductive environment for our fetus.
I've got a question in regard to the heat stress, because in our operation here, we calve in May and June with our cows, mostly in May, and then the few in the calve in June. And that has been something that we've seen some more folks in the industry looking at maybe moving these cattle back to later calving. So in the discussion when that comes up, when people talk about moving cows back to later calving, is the concern on heat stress with that. And I haven't necessarily noticed that I've had as much issue with it, but it's been a concern, and I'm sure there's some years that it's more likely than other years. But with that heat stress, what are your thoughts as far as with some of these, as we look at moving calving back to being more in sync with what they would call being in sync with nature, when normal other things or wildlife are having their babies and things like that? But your thoughts now in regard to that with heat stress? Yeah.
So this is also a thing that's so dependent on where you're at in the world. I joke in Missouri, we say spring calving, and our cattlemen out here are having calves in February when it's snowing. And the reason is for that would put our breeding season right in the middle of June, July, August, which is an awful time to try and get a cow pregnant. So thinking of that, and that's kind of how we've adapted here, but just knowing your seasons and knowing that it's kind of a battle that you have to pick and choose. Are you going to pick your hard, maybe be pulling calves in February when it's snowing, or are you going to try and breed late summer and take your chances with your pregnancy rate?
Another question I had in regard to that less than 45-day period that we're talking about now, and we talked about stress, or travel was the one thing in the first conversation when it comes to stress. But what about preg checking, the physical element of preg checking? Do we run the risk on some of those that are going to be in that time frame of messing with that fetus when we're preg checking? Because it's kind of a two-way deal, because we kind of need to preg check, but yet would that be one of the things that could cause some issues there?
So the actual preg checking itself, like just using that ultrasound, is not going to be enough to disturb that fetal environment. So I wouldn't have any concerns there. Where you could see stress within that is when you're handling those cattle, trying to get them in through the chute, trying to get them to see the vet. That's going to be more stressful than that vet going in there and just checking. So my suggestion with that is just good handling techniques are always going to work in your favor. Just moving them quiet, not stressing them, not running them. Anything that you can do to just keep that event in general as a smooth flowing operation will help you out. But no, I wouldn't be concerned about preg checking.
Okay. Well, it's always been something that in the back of my mind I wondered just a little bit about, because I know one of the things our vet has always been a little bit concerned about is really rather to pregging these cows when they're a little bit later, and we usually don't start till we're about 100 days past when we put the bulls in, and and then going from there. Of course, there's a lot of different reasons for that too. But anything else in that early embryonic phase area there that we didn't already cover?
I guess one more comment about the preg checking. I know most people, it does vary on when you do that, but 30 to 45 days is kind of that industry standard. You can definitely confirm a pregnancy, but just knowing that you're confirming still in that stage of being early embryonic, there's a lot that can happen between that confirmed pregnancy to when that calf should be on the ground. Mm-hmm. So even if you do confirm it and then it comes up and she's open, you're like, what in the world happened? That's a lot of time to go between seeing that fetus, and then she could have multiple impacts between then and when she should be giving birth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's take a break here, Chloe. And when we come back, let's then get into the second phase of that. And that would be what we'd call is more of the fetal loss, because it's after that 45-day period. Let's do that when we come back here after the break.
Absolutely.
This segment today of the Working Ranch Radio Show brought to you by the North American Limousine Foundation.
With rising feed costs and an increased focus on sustainability within the beef industry, feed efficiency is more than a buzzword. It's rapidly becoming a battle cry in an industry challenged to do more with less. By incorporating today's Limousine and Limflex genetics into your planned crossbreeding program, you can capitalize on the breed's inherent feed efficiency advantage and moderate cow size, while still banking the premiums paid for high-quality, high-yielding carcasses. That's two ways to profit instead of one. Let Limousine and Limflex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
As we continue on our topic here today, looking at mitigating pregnancy loss in cow herds, we've always wondered what happens to those calves that we know we've gotten a cow, and then between the time of pregging and calving, that cow comes in without a calf, and we know we didn't see a dead calf, but where did that happen? That's kind of really the context of our conversation today, and my guest is Chloe Collins with the University of Missouri out of the Extension. And Chloe, we in the last segment, as we were talking about that first area of potential loss that could happen, early embryonic loss that would be anywhere from the cow being bred to the first 45 days. After 45 days, we're going to call that a fetal loss on that. Let's talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing.
Yeah. So whenever we're talking about fetal loss, that can also take just as many forms as our early embryonic can. A couple of things that I think of right off the bat when talking about fetal loss is any kind of thing, one, affecting that fetal environment in the cow. So I think of maybe is that cow experiencing any disease? What's her plane of nutrition look like? And how is that environment treating her? Mm-hmm. So again, I want to start with kind of the disease factor. Whenever we see some of these diseases, for example, brucellosis is a huge concern and can really be impactful on pregnancy, mainly in our second half of that gestation. Even if it doesn't cause abortion necessarily, it can cause those calves when they're born to just be weak, a little bit smaller, and just generally unhealthy. So that's an easy one that you can mitigate in your herd. So just make sure your bull is tested, make sure he's free and clear, go ahead and vaccinate that cow. And a lot of these reproductive diseases that we're seeing affect that fetal loss can be mitigated.
Okay, what are some other causes?
So another one can be nutrition. So when we're thinking about that late gestation, that calf is going to grow the most within that last 3 months of gestation. So what that means for the cow is she's going to really have to start upping her nutrient intake to provide for that growth to happen. So whenever we see that plane of nutrition, if it's not increased to meet her needs, she's going to start taking away nutrients from that calf's growth just to simply maintain herself. So whenever we see that, if it's in a severe enough environment, that calf can be aborted just due to not being supported by that cow nutritionally.
In that vein of nutrition, what's kind of what would you consider, because we've got a numbering system on the condition of our cattle. Where do you feel it gets down too far to where that's really a probable thing that could happen?
Yeah. So again, depending on the time of year, but usually my best recommendation is keep those on the beef side of things, keep those cows between a 5 and a 6. On our dairy side of things, keep them between a 3 and a 4. So if we're talking beef, keeping them at a 6 going into late gestation before they have that calf, that's a really safe place to be as far as body condition score. Because even if they have that calf, they lose a little bit. In theory, they should still be around a 5, which is pretty good. When we see those cows get down to like a 4 or a 3, they're going to be a little bit stressed, but anything lower than a 3 is definitely when I would start seeing any kind of loss due to nutritional deficiencies.
Now, something you had mentioned there, and I wrote that down real quick, is it said depending on the time of year, because, for example, we are later calvers. So when you talk about that time of year, okay, expand on that a little bit more, because I think that conditioning if a cow is dropping down into four body score in February is a way different deal than a cow that's a 4 condition score in April.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about like our spring calvers who, depending on where you're at in the world, are calving anywhere from February to May, they may be a little bit okay coming in a little bit smaller just because you're about to have that flush of spring forage for them to build back that body condition score pretty quick. If we're seeing a fall calver go in and she's at a 5 trying to have a calf, that's where I get concerned, because we're going to start worrying about, okay, what are we going to feed her through the winter to get her condition back up, which is going to be a lot harder to do with a fall calver versus a spring calver.
Well, and that's something that is a good point, because I think a lot of times, I know in the conversations that I have, and I say, we are a May, June calver. Well, for us here, we're just now starting to green up. You're in Missouri. Are you guys, you're greening up, aren't you? I mean, you're past greening up. You're there.
Yeah, our fescue is starting to come in, which is great. I actually was at our research center the other day, and we have some rye planted, and it looks wonderful. So depending on your forage can definitely interfere with that calving season and either work in your favor on body condition score or maybe limit you and make some of those management decisions. Yeah.
And I guess the point I'm trying to make here is there's been a lot of conversation in our industry looking at May, June calving, which I get, we're there. But I think the bigger question you ask yourself is what matches the environment that you're in. And as you were just saying there, I mean, you're 5-6 weeks ahead of us. And so that would be different. So I could see a different time frame for that. So that would make a lot of sense with that when it comes to poor nutrition. Now, something you had mentioned in your article too was another thing that could cause pregnancy loss was toxins. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk toxins in terms of what I know. So in here in Missouri, we have fescue. So fescue can be a great thing, but it can also be kind of a detrimental thing to your herd if you let it. So when I think about toxins in fescue, I think about toxic fescue, basically endophyte infected fescue. So what that endophyte is it actually acts as a vasoconstrictor in our animals. So where that comes into play with gestation is we think about vasoconstriction, thinking about blood supply to that uterus to support that calf. That's going to be severely reduced when that cow is on some toxic fescue. So that turns into a huge issue because we know that blood supply is not just blood supply, it's also transporting nutrients to that calf and everything that it needs to stay alive and healthy. Mm-hmm. So when we start reducing that, we may see just a weaker calf, but in the most severe cases, we're going to see that actual fetal loss occur.
Mm-hmm. Now, something you said, okay, you were going to talk about what you knew there, and that's something that's not as relevant that we see in the western part because we don't have that. However, one of the toxins that I have to deal with, and a lot of folks that are in areas where there's a lot of pine trees, is not having those cows eat needles, which is a toxin that will cause abortion. So is that something you're aware of as well?
So not as much as I am with fescue, but with any kind of toxin, one of our specialists on campus has my favorite saying for how to deal with it is dilution is the solution. So if you know that you're going to be in an environment where you do have toxins to deal with, and that's just part of raising your herd, making sure that they have access to forage that is non-toxic is going to be a safe way to kind of mitigate those toxins in your environment. Mm-hmm. So whether it's just putting out hay to keep them away from the pine needles, or for us, if it's maybe adding in some concentrates to mitigate that toxin load from the fescue, anything you can do to just, again, dilute it is going to help you out.
Yeah. And another thought, it just came to my mind too, is something else that we deal with. And this would kind of be really anybody in the country that if there's a time of the year where you're having to substitute feed a little bit more, and that is the nitrates that could be in certain types of feed, and that just kind of goes back to testing your feed, knowing what you have before you feed it to the cows. But nitrates is something, of course, another toxin that I think really is pretty widespread across the country.
Yeah. So one thing I will make an extension plug, no matter where you are in the country, your state has extension services, and they can help you set up feed testing. They can come out, sample your hay, sample your forages, and send that off to a lab so you know exactly what you're working with. But the thing to remember with nitrate toxicity is whether that plant is harvested by your cattle, whether it's cut, that nitrate is going to stay the same. It's not going to gas off like our prussic acid will. So just being aware that whether you're feeding stored feeds or you're grazing, that nitrate is going to be there, especially after periods of drought is when it's going to be the most concentrated.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take another break here, Chloe. And when we come back, I want to continue on with just a few more, some other factors that can cause pregnancy loss during gestation of our cows. We'll get into those after the break. This segment of the Working Ranch Radio Show brought to you by Vigortone Minerals.
Support your cattle's health and productivity with Vigortone Minerals. Since 1912, Vigortone has been a trusted name in animal nutrition. Our revitalized product line offers targeted nutrition for every stage of production and every region. Vigortone delivers consistent performance and simplifies your mineral decisions. Wherever you are, Vigortone works. Visit Vigortone.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show as we continue on now and talking about mitigating pregnancy loss in cow herds. Chloe Collins out of the University of Missouri Extension joining us here today. And Chloe, one of the things you'd mentioned, it just kind of lightly touched this a bit, and we get into some other things as well, is hormone imbalances that could potentially cause a cow to abort a calf after that in that fetal period of after 45 days. Just hit that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about hormones, they are going to be the main drivers of that estrous cycle in your cattle, as well as maintaining a pregnancy. So if anything within hormones is off, if it's unbalanced, that pregnancy, that breeding is not going to be successful. So the first thing I think about when setting that cow up for success is talking about her energy intake. So she's going to partition those energy requirements, first to maintain her body, second to grow, third to lactate, and then she'll shunt some off for reproduction. So to make sure your hormones are even going to be working like they should, making sure she has enough energy is going to be number one.
Mm-hmm. You talked about something there, and you said energy, those cows need enough energy. And it brought up another point here in the difference in looking in how we manage these older set of cows on your operation versus the younger cows that are still growing. And I think that's that phrase right there, those cattle that are still growing. That's a whole nother element that we need to think about with them and getting them to that point, not only in carrying that calf to full term, but then following that and getting that rebreed. But that's another key part of understanding the fact that we've got young cows and old cows. Those young cows need a little bit different management.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we sometimes see that loss in our heifers, is because they're just simply trying to grow and maintain themselves. Plus, we're asking them to have an entire calf on top of that. And that usually doesn't surprise me if your cows are doing great, but maybe your heifers have a little bit trouble getting bred. Not a super surprising issues, but maybe they just need a little bit more care and feed on the side.
Mm-hmm. So that leads us, that's a good segue because it leads us into another conversation in all of this, and that is genetics. Because one of the things that we're hearing a lot in our industry is efficiency in our cattle. So with that in mind, and from the genetic side of things, talk about that, because I think that's one of the things that, I mean, we're aware of that, but then let's just have that conversation.
Yeah. So I know when a lot of us think about efficiency, the first place our mind usually goes is feed efficiency, which is great. Like, I absolutely love feed efficient cattle. They make our life so much easier. But what we also need to keep in the back of our mind is reproductive efficiency. So when I think about that, I kind of think about my rules of thumb. So we want a cow or a heifer to give us a calf every 365 days, and we want that calf to wean at 50% of her body weight. So right now, I think if she can't meet those two goals, it's time to get some wheels under her, get her off your farm, take advantage of what the cattle market is doing right now. Mm-hmm. So if she's not reproductively efficient, one, you're going to lose money and you're not going to be able to make money.
Mm-hmm. So you gave the rules of thumb there, one of them being 50% of body weight. Mm-hmm. That's, I don't know that there's very many guys that do that are there. What do you think?
It's becoming an increasingly harder goal to meet. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to cow size, but don't let me get too far off my train of thought and get away from our conversation.
Why is that kind of another soapbox for you a little bit?
Oh man, that could be another podcast episode.
Okay. One of the other things we've talked about it when we were talking earlier on, one of the first initial things that could cause a loss of a calf and a cow was stress. And of course, I'm going to kind of group a couple of these together. We've already talked heat stress a little bit, but injuries and inflammation, that's also stress within the cow itself, but just early diagnosing when the cow is sick or those kinds of things is probably pretty key to getting ahead of that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I always recommend just putting eyes on your cattle. The one thing that I tell all my producers is know they're normal. So be able to recognize it, know what your normal in your herd looks like. That way, if you ever see an abnormality, maybe somebody's separated off, somebody's got droopy ears, heads down, not eating, be able to recognize that and call your vet to figure out what's going on before it becomes a bigger problem.
So as we move to the next phase of this, and we've kind of dabbled a bit of this conversation already, but some other things when we start to figure out, how can we mitigate some of these problems? How can we get ahead of this before we get to that point where we're in June and we're getting ready to brand and we're like, why do we have X amount of cows without a calf, and trying to get that figured out ahead of time. So just kind of go through some steps. I know we've talked mainly a little bit, some of these already, but some ways that you feel could be ways to mitigate seeing that pregnancy loss in our cow herds from the time we preg till when we actually expect those calves to hit the ground.
So the good news is there's probably just as many mitigation strategies as there are causes of loss. My first recommendation for everybody, no matter if you have 1 cow or 500, is have a good vet on your side. So they're going to be imperative in knowing what's going on with your herd, what's your normal, and then being able to have them on call to step in if you're having an emergency or you have a cow that's not getting bred. Utilizing their knowledge and expertise is going to immensely help you. And I always say too, no question is a silly question when it has to deal with putting money in your pocket.
And we talked also a little bit about nutrition when we talked about poor nutrition, but I think that's one of the mitigating parts of that. And I think there's a lot of guys have different mindsets where they want their nutrition to be at based upon, of course, when they're calving and how things hit in their particular part of the country. But I think having a cow, not to the point of, because being too fat can be as detrimental in some ways to having a cow undernutritioned as well. So from the nutritional side of things, your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So nutrition can go in so many different forms. Again, one, we talked about body condition score, keeping those ladies at about a 5 to a 6 for beef, 3 to 4 for dairy, is going to just mitigate a lot of those issues in itself. When we see our cows who may be a little bit thicker, where I think of that impact is actually on just getting bred itself. So whenever we have a lot of fat on an animal, that's going to hinder communication between the brain and those reproductive tissues. She's going to have a lot harder time ovulating. And then that fat will actually start going around the ovary and the oviduct, and that embryo can't make it into the uterus. So a lot of people say, oh yeah, she's big, she's doing great, but she's actually hurting herself by carrying all that condition.
Yeah, which is, I think, one of the things that we've always tried to hit is, we're always good to bring the cows down condition-wise through the winter to a certain point, with the idea that as they calve and green grass is hitting, then that nutrition is starting to build back up. And a cow that is gaining in condition score has a tendency to cycle better than a cow that's over-conditioned, is kind of what you're saying.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So one other thing, of course, keeping accurate records and updating them. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that if you've got a cow, and I know a lot of guys will say, if a cow doesn't bring in a calf at the end of the year, she needs to go down the road. And I would readily agree with that in most cases. There's always a few exceptions. But one of the things that it'll do is, if you keep good records, if that cow does not bring in a calf, 2 years in a row, she could physically have something wrong.
Yeah, you're correct. So I'll give you my favorite extension answer, which is it depends. So when we think about the genetic portion of that, if she's not breeding back, maybe it could be something genetic that we're just not seeing. Maybe something about her reproductive tract is simply misshapen. Maybe she's not ovulating as much as she should be. It may just be something that we're never going to see and never going to figure out, because it's not going to present other than she's not getting bred. Mm-hmm. So if that cow is a repeat offender, I would go ahead and make that move of, let's go ahead and send her on down the road. But even though prices are high, if it's maybe a heifer, thinking about she's not getting bred on that first service, maybe not on her second service, I'd be a little bit more lenient to giving her a shot versus maybe an older cow who is now just kind of at the end of her productive life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know I'm going to have guys listen that are pretty hardliners on, if they don't bring in a calf, they need to go down the road. And I get it, because I think you could potentially be putting genetics in your herd that is not good, has poor reproductive genetics. And so I get that to a point. But there's, like you said, a good extension answer. It depends.
Absolutely. And keeping those records on your cattle, knowing if they bred first service, did they breed second service, what is their calving interval looking like, that can help you kind of make some comparative decisions and really narrow it down.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The record keeping is big, and that's no matter really maybe what size of operation you are. As you had referenced earlier, whether you're one cow or 500 head, it's that those records could really save you a considerable amount of expenses.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, some people get a little bit nervous when they think about record keeping. It can be as extensive or simplistic as you want it to be, as long as it's serving the goal of your operation. I think that's great.
Okay. One of the things you touched on briefly, but I want to hit this a little bit. I've had a couple shows where we've talked about cow, just low stress management, but even your facilities, just everything about those cattle when we're handling them in the fall of the year. We've got cattle that could be bred 100 days. We've got cattle that could be bred 35 to 45 days. Either way, just that whole element of low stress, good facilities when we're pregnant, when we're doing those kinds of things, can pay off in the long run as well.
Oh, absolutely. The best kind of rule of thumb for me there is treat everybody like you don't know where they're at in their stage of pregnancy. So even though those later gestation cattle, that embryo or that fetus is going to be pretty secure in that uterine environment, go ahead and treat her as if she was only in that early embryonic period. So don't stress them, don't run them. Just, if you're able to, work them calmly. I know that's kind of hard for some of us every now and then when we have that crazy cow that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. But the more that you can do to just keep them on a level-minded state when we're working through the chute is going to help them out immensely.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. Sometimes certain cows can run your patience for sure. So,
absolutely.
Chloe, thanks for joining us. Before we head out here today, just some final comments on this, because it is, to me, this has always been a head scratcher. Why we're losing calves, and it's not like it's bad for us, but you look at where we're at with calf prices now, but even when calf prices aren't as good, your margins are less. So, I mean, every calf is valuable no matter where the market's at. But just, you see a cow, she bred up fine, she pregged fine, everything looks good. And then all of a sudden she doesn't come in. And I'm like, man, what's going on with that deal? And so I think this is an issue for a lot of us. It's, we think about and we wonder about. And so some final comments from you on this.
Yeah. And I'm no economist. I'll do a little bit of cowboy math. But any calf that you don't get on the ground is a chunk of change out of your pocket. And even though calf prices are high, our input costs are right up there with them. And a lot of people don't think of it. So maybe if it is spending a teeny tiny bit more on your nutrition, maybe spending a little bit more at the vet to make sure everybody's up to date on their vaccines, and just prepping those cattle to be successful in carrying a calf, that's going to pay out dividends at the end.
You bet. That's a good way to summarize our conversation here today and looking at this whole concept of mitigating pregnancy loss in our cow herds. Chloe, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate you being on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thank you, Justin.
You bet. Chloe Collins out of the University of Missouri Extension joining us here today on the program. Appreciate her insight as we look at this topic of mitigating pregnancy loss in cow herds. And I realize it's probably not something that is a huge percentage of your operation. However, it would be if you get a disease or something in there, or you feed some bad feed that could cause some toxicity poisoning and things like that. However, it is one of those things just to look at, to understand, and maybe there's some tweaking that we can do in each of our own ranching operations that could minimize those losses, because they can add up over the years if you look at that, and continuing to find ways that we can be productive and profitable in each and everyone's ranching operation. Again, thank you to Chloe Collins for that. If you want to find out more information or you want to visit with her, you can get a hold of the University of Missouri's Extension. Their website, of course, is extension.missouri.edu. Stay with us. The Captain Tim Wilburn, editor of the Working Ranch magazine, will be in next for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Geld V and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Geld V and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Geld V and Balancer genetics.
Hey, Justin, I'm on the phone here with Heath Schubert. He's with HLRBO. It's a online platform that hooks up hunters with landowners. I think it'd be just going by the website here, hlrbo.com. It's a pretty cool setup. So Heath, why don't you fill us in on how our ranchers can be a part of this if they want to?
Sure, absolutely. HLRBO is a national platform that connects landowners with hunters looking to lease out their property and hunters looking for places to hunt. Basically, for landowners, just go on the website, hlrbo.com, fill out the form to create a listing. We review and approve it, and have a field rep come out and take photos and videos for free. And then we start setting out to hunters who might be interested, and they contact you directly with questions or to lease. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy, pretty seamless process. Great way for landowners to earn additional income leasing out their property.
And it's a free online setup, I guess you could call it. It's kind of like you say, you got to line it all out there online. But they also, the landowner, they can set their own lease rate and they receive 100% of that, correct?
Correct. Yep. There's no charge for landowners on HLRBO. So you keep 100% of the proceeds, and yep. So pretty good opportunity for landowners looking to earn additional income.
And it looks like you got quite a few field reps there too.
Yep. We have field reps in most states, and we have some that'll travel too. So, great opportunity to get some drone footage of your property or get some videos, some professional photos created. And obviously that, helps the listing look great on the website and attracts more hunters and stuff. And they're even willing to set up trail cams and stuff too, for live feed on the website. So there's a lot of great options out there for landowners on HLRBO.
And reading some of the testimonials I see, it's a pretty quick turnaround. A lot of guys are listing and they'll get some callbacks in the next week or so.
Yeah, I mean, depending on, the area and stuff, property usually leases out pretty quick. There's a lot of demand. We have 100,000 plus hunters on the platform looking for leasing options. So it's a pretty good opportunity for landowners for sure.
What's the vetting out process like now? If somebody calls me and says they want to come on, maybe hunt some turkeys or something like that, what do I need to know about that? How do I find out whether they're, somebody that I want on the property or not?
For hunting, we do verification on that. So they do fill out a background check and do all that. So they are verified and they do complete a background check. So, and you do meet with them prior. So, they'll set up a time to come meet with you. You talk on the phone, you can talk over the website, and whether or not you want to lease for them is completely up to you. So we leave it up to you to decide if it's a good fit for your property or not.
So our landowners don't have to do any of the, whether they're legal or not. I mean, that's all vetted out and taken care of.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Heath. Well, folks, you can go to hlrbo.com and check it out. It's a great website, and it sounds like a good platform, Heath. So good luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
All right.
And that was the Captain Tim O'Byrne with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. I always appreciate how he's out there digging and rooting around, finding things that he can pass along to all of us here in the industry, things that will be helpful for us, not only information to know, but potential income possibilities, just like this one is that you heard about this week. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, meteorologist Don Day stepping in with this week's long-range weather forecast.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Dewormer. Earlier in the program, the conversation came up as we were talking about how we need to manage those younger bred animals a little bit different than those older, mature cows. Here's something to think about. With up to 150 days of parasite protection in just one dose, long-range epinomectin extended-release dewormer helps improve replacement heifer pregnancy rates, and it shortens those calving intervals. Now, there was a study done where heifers treated with long-range gave birth to 28% more calves during the first 21 days of calving season than heifers that were treated with generic ivermectin. As we know, earlier calving leads to heavier weaning weights. Heavier weaning weights means a bigger return on sale day. If you want to find out more, you can go to the website at longrangedewormer.com. Now remember, do not treat within 48 days of slaughter. Don't use in female dairy cattle 20 months of age or older, and pregnant women should wear gloves and exercise caution or avoid handling this product. As we turn towards our long-range weather, joining us as he does each and every week is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as I've been watching the last week of the weather, your weather reports that are coming down, of course, it's spring. So 1 minute we're dealing with cool and snowy or rainy weather, and then in the afternoon it's sun coming out and everything like that. So pretty normal, but we are starting to really see just kind of some stack of storms starting to build up that are moving across the country.
Yeah, we're getting into a much more active pattern now. This is after a week where the weather across the United States got pretty quiet. There was kind of a break in the action, so to speak, but that's all it is. As we go into the next 7 to 14 days, the month of April is going to be busy. Busy meaning a lot of systems are going to come off the Pacific, cross even coming out of Northwest Canada and through the lower 48. And this is going to bring a wide variety of weather. I mean, this time of year, you can expect anything from snow to severe thunderstorm activity. This time of year, you can have a snowstorm in one part of the country, tornadoes in another part. And I think April won't disappoint in that regard. It's going to be across most of the United States, a very busy month.
So there are areas, though, and when I was looking at some of your stuff, one of the areas that you were a little concerned about earlier was the Four Corners area in the desert Southwest. Some of this moisture that we're starting to see still kind of leaving those folks kind of high and dry.
Yeah, what we're going to see, this is good news, bad news, depending on where you are. I will start with the good news first. The good news is that it does look like Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, parts of Colorado, then back across Utah and Idaho into the northern Great Basin. Those are the areas that where there's a lot of drought right now have some really good chances of getting some beneficial moisture, enough to make a difference. And that's going to spread into the northwestern Corn Belt. But there are two areas that seem to be missing out in this pattern, the southwest United States that you just mentioned. And if you look at eastern Montana and North Dakota, they just are not catching these storms so far. And at least here for another week, I think that's going to be the case. North Dakota, eastern Montana, southern Alberta, Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, those areas are going to miss out on these bigger spring storms, at least at the first, let's say the first week to 10 days in April. The southwest United States is kind of in the same ballgame. We had a really nice stretch for a while in Arizona, parts of Utah and southwest Colorado, but since then it's gone drier. Now, I'm hoping that the second half of April into early May, those areas I just mentioned that are drier are probably going to have some better chances. So there's help in some areas and there's not help in others.
Mm-hmm. So with as these continue to move through, how are we looking in, of course, those areas in our area, we're just looking at maybe potential snow and rain type mix. But what about the areas that are always the tornado type area, or what do you want to call it, alley of the country?
Right, when we start, alley, right.
Yeah, tornado alley. When we see our weather that's a little bit tumultuous up here, down there, it's a whole different deal. What are they going to start to see?
Well, since we've had some fair weather here, we really have seen a big decrease in severe weather over the last week, but that's going to change. And as we get into next week, as these storms come through the Pacific, then out of the Rockies into the plains, we'll be talking about severe weather again. And I think this is going to be really the case the middle to the end of this upcoming week. You're going to see thunderstorm activity and that risk of severe weather returning. And that would be from the central and southern Corn Belt through the eastern part of the southern plains. And, we're seeing signs. We're definitely seeing signs of a spring pattern wanting to get going. I mean, we've had over the last week some pretty significant rain in South and Southeast Texas. Now, it hasn't been getting up into the western part of Texas where we need it, but things are going to start to ramp up with that severe weather again, and folks need to be ready for that.
Okay. All right, Don. Well, appreciate the update and look forward to talking to you next week. Appreciate it.
Sounds good.
And if you want to follow along and tune in each and every morning to Don Day's Weather Podcast, you can find a link to all of his different methods and ways you can take that by going to the podcast site at dayweatherpodcast.com. And then you can get it through YouTube, Apple, Google's, a variety of different ways of listening to his weather podcast, however you want to take that. Now, I might also mention, too, that if you go to his regular website at dayweather.com, we were talking last week about cocoa rods, and something I'm involved in. A lot of other folks are involved in as well. You turn in your weather information each and every morning. It's pretty simple to do. There's an app to do that through it, but it's also a rain gauge, kind of a specific type of rain gauge that you need to have that has a 4-inch diameter. Looking on Don's website, he has on there the Tropo rain gauge, and I think we've talked about it, or you hear that commercial on the show as well, but that's a little bit a nicer rain gauge, I will say, than the one I've got, and encourage you to maybe check that out if you want to be a Cocoa Roz respondent on that and be a part of that whole service, sharing that information out with folks all across the country. You can get one through their website, or if you want to get one through Don's website and get the Tropo rain gauge, take a look up for yourself. Again, that is dayweather.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we'll put a wrap on this week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Support your cattle's health and productivity with Vigortone minerals. Since 1912, Vigortone has been a trusted name in animal nutrition. Our revitalized product line offers targeted nutrition for every stage of production and every region. Vigortone delivers consistent performance and simplifies your mineral decisions. Wherever you are, Vigortone works. Visit Vigortone.com to learn more.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Geld V and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
Well, before we head out here today, I just want to bring up three things and mainly just kind of pass along some information that you might find useful as well. First thing would be, how about this? Did this come across your news feed last week? Because it did mine. And that was the ribbon cutting for Sustainable Beef LLC in North Platte, Nebraska. And I knew that was going to be happening, but it was good to see that. And I just want to wish all of the folks involved with that whole endeavor a good luck and a congratulations on that. That's been several years in the making, from dream to reality and all of that. And of course, we've had here on our show Trey Wasserberger, who joined us to talk about that. First, a few years ago, we were talking about just the dream that they had of as local ranchers being part of that process of being a part of a packing facility. And then, of course, this past January, he joined us in episode 199 to talk about where it's at now, as they were just on the cusp of getting things ready to go. And of course, this past week, having that ribbon cutting on that state-of-the-art $400 million packing facility with about 850 jobs that will bring to the area of North Platte, Nebraska. So really a hearty congratulations to all of the folks with Sustainable Beef LLC, and good luck to them as they move forward in that. Now, something else that I also wanted to bring about, and this was something that I was just probably scrolling through Facebook, and I came across this, and it was the Beef Cattle Research Council out of Canada. And on their Facebook page, they've got a lot of short little videos, little reels on there that address a lot of different animal health issues, just simple little things. And I'll tell you what, very practical advice in that. I encourage you to check it out. It's the Beef Research Council out of Canada. Now, their website is beefresearch.ca, but if you just go to Facebook and you search Beef Cattle Research Council, you will find that very practical videos in there, everything from how to tube a calf to handling dehydrated young calves and cow issues, a lot of different things. I think you'll find that very, very useful and practical for you, just if you're kind of out there and wanting to be educated instead of just kind of numbing through some of the reels that we see on social media. If you want to make some good use out of that, check that out. Again, it's the Beef Cattle Research Council's Facebook page. And finally here today, the April-May issue of Working Ranch Magazine will be showing up in your mailbox if it hasn't already here shortly. Another great addition for this next couple of months. In fact, I was kind of chuckling just a little bit because one of the stories is titled, "Is Bigger Better? Cow Size is Increasing, but Does Everyone Benefit?" And of course, we kind of touched just a bit briefly on that in our show here today. Now, another article that I thought was interesting is how to secure the right horse at an auction. Boy, we've all heard the horse stories on that, but if you want to find out what they have to say in that story, get the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine. And if you're not a subscriber, a couple of ways you can do it. You can start your subscription by going to workingranchmag.com, or you can stop by your local Tractor Supply and pick up the latest issue of Working Ranch Magazine. Well, before we leave, if you do want to get a hold of me, say you have an idea for a show topic or questions or comments you'd want to leave us, send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. We encourage you to do that. We look forward to hearing from you. And by the way, if you're listening via podcast, be sure to leave us a rating or a review. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Thanks again for joining us on our program this week. By the way, tune in next week at this same time, same place, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, your host. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.